Oh, no? No? No, you can't. The good news is you can't hear me, but I can hear you. All right, so last week we started discussing living a Christian life in an eternal perspective. And your mic's not. It's not. All right, user error. How about that? All right. So last week we started talking about living a Christian life with an eternal perspective, and we started off looking at a little bit about what the world teaches us directly and indirectly in terms of how we should live our life. Very focused on us, focused on our happiness, focused on the here and now, focused on things that make us happy here on earth, right? And we spent a little bit of time talking about how that is detrimental, to us as Christians, right? We can lose our focus. And what's really interesting, if you weren't here first service, Tom has a really good lesson today. And when I think about kind of what Tom preached on today, and what Tad has preached on, really, frequently as of late, it's been, mission work and seeking and saving the lost. And you can tell those are things that are, on their hearts, right? And obviously, those are things really important to us. So I want to just give you a little bit of background. One of the reasons why I have chosen the topics I've chosen the last, couple of months is, one of the things that's on my heart is kind of the future of the church, right? If you think about, it's something that I think a lot about now. If you think about in Steve's message this morning, in regarding West Branch, you think about kind of our northern Michigan efforts, and Byron mentioned this also last week. There's a lot of churches up there that are on the cusp of going away, right? And they're on the cusp of going away, for two reasons. One, they don't have the, the attendance they once had. And Byron made a really good point about Grayling last week. There's basically one individual, who does everything up there. So they don't have the, engagement and leadership necessary to continue on, right? And so as I think about Waterford from 20 years ago when we were here, in 2000 and 2004, and I think about Waterford today, and I think about Waterford, 20 years from now, I think a lot about what are the things we need to be doing today to ensure that Waterford is a growing, thriving congregation 20 years from now, so we're not in the same position as those churches. And we've benefited a lot as a congregation from congregations in our area closing down. We've had an influx of people, and that's kept our attendance up, right? But the question becomes, what do we do, right? Those of us who are, and this is everyone in the room, those of us who are here and committed to Waterford, what do we do to keep Waterford growing and ensure that Waterford is the thriving congregation, that it could be and should be 20 years from now, right? So when I talk about living with an eternal perspective, part of what I tend to focus in on, much like you hear Tom and much like you hear Tad talk about seeking and saving the lost, part of what I focus in on, probably more than I should, is like, what are we doing as individuals to participate in and grow the church? What are we doing as individuals to develop the next, generation of leaders as a church? Because we're not doing that now, then, one day we'll wake up and we go, oh, we don't have, what we need to survive and thrive as a church, right? So I apologize if at times, maybe you're like, wow, this is a bit of a, it's a bit of a redo of what we've talked about. It's something that's just on my heart, and it's hopefully looking at it maybe through a different lens from time to time. but getting back to what are the things we need to do, today, that will ultimately ensure that, this church is thriving and growing, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? And a big part of that, before we jump into the lesson, is thinking about the choices and the sacrifices we have to make today that we know that will prepare the church, for the long term. Okay, so when I think about living with an eternal perspective, it is what are the changes in behaviors we need to make today as Christians to ensure that this church grows. Not just you get to heaven, right? But to make sure this church grows and ultimately is here 10, 15, 20 years from now, right? That's kind of the focus, and that's part of why we got into the responsibility versus obligation discussion, which we'll touch on a little bit more today. So if you remember, if you weren't here, I'll just kind of give you a quick recap. And if you were here, this is just kind of a refresher before we jump into the discussion for today. So the introduction was this. The Bible teaches that living with an eternal perspective means focusing on God's eternal kingdom, rewards, and purposes rather than temporarily earthly concerns. So this mindset shapes how Christians prioritize their time, resources, and actions regarding that life on earth that's brief compared to eternity with God. It invokes seeking heavenly treasures, enduring hardships for Christ's sake, and living in the light of Jesus' return and final judgment. And this is the part that I kind of focused on. As believers, we are called to view our present lives through the lens of eternity, right? And so think about, once again, what I just said, for those of you who popped in. Think about the things you do today and how they're going to contribute not just to your salvation, but how they'll contribute to the growth of this church and sustaining, this church over the next 20 years, right? And I'm talking specifically about the church here in Waterford, okay? The two verses that we're using before we get into the details of today are Colossians 3, 1 and 2. Since then, you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, right? And the purpose of that verse is, to really prioritize the eternal realities with the worldly distractions, right? And I do think that for the most part, we're a distracted people. And we're distracted people because we have access to information more than we ever have. We have capital and resources, and we have, a discretionary income to do things that people 100, 200, 300 years ago didn't have. And so when you have more resources, when you have more access to information, you have more choices as to how you spend your time, right? And when you have more choices as to how you spend your time, that leads you to a place where you can choose one thing over another, okay? And it's something I struggle with really all the time, right? And part of the reason why I tend to focus on responsibility versus obligation is because that difference between feeling that I have the choice to do something versus feeling like I really need to do something, okay? There's a big difference, right? Choosing to do something and feeling like you should do something because is a big difference. So that was the first verse. And then the second verse is, it was 2 Corinthians 4:18. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal, right? And that's, once again, that kind of goes back to the topic of distraction versus, eternal perspective. It's really easy because we do have a lot of things at our disposal now today to entertain us, to bring us, joy. It's really easy to kind of do those things because they're available to us today, right? We're in that world of instant gratification, right? And one of the things I wrestle with, and Shannon and I talk about this a lot, I've gotten better the last 10 years, but certainly, the prior, 10, 15, 20 years before that, as I struggle with balancing the obligation to, succeed and spend time on work versus, other things that, would be focused on, my spirituality, growing the spiritual strength of my family, contributing to the church. And it's just something I've struggled with, right? Because it's really easy to say, oh, I have to do that because it's work, right? Like, oh, I have to do that because it's my family. And for many years, I did that, right? Like, for many years, I did. And I've tried to get better at not using work as a reason, to not do something that I should be doing from a church perspective, okay? So there's a couple of different elements of this. The first one, there was really 6, which I covered, and I'll touch on those again so you know what we're going to cover. The first one was store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. Okay, that was the first area of focus to have an eternal perspective. Live in light of Christ's return and judgment. That was the second one. Endure suffering with eternal hope. And then the last couple, use earthly resources for eternal purposes. And then finally, seek God's kingdom above all. So those are kind of the 5 different elements of this, right? And so once we get through those, I know we won't get through them all today. It may be a couple of weeks because we have, I think, a guest speaker, Matt Allen, next week. We'll look at the examples of people in the Bible who made those same choices, right? And one of the very first ones we'll look at, just to kind of give you a preview, is Abraham, right? And the choices that he made, right? And how they impacted his life and his family's lives for generations, right? Difficult choice, but made the right choice, okay? So first of all, and I know we touched on this a little bit last week, store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. I touched on this. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be also. So that last piece, and once again, this class is about just kind of challenging you to think about the things you do, the choices you make, okay? It's not about, I'm not in here just going through, verse after verse after verse to deepen your knowledge of the scripture. What I'm trying to challenge you to do is really reflect on the things you do in your life, the choices you make in your life, and how those are both moving you and your family closer to God and how they're helping you move this church closer to God, right? So I want to talk about the last part of that. When you hear, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What are your thoughts on that? I have some thoughts, but what do you guys have to say?
I've got a men's study Bible, and it talks about that. And it says, look at your checking account and see where you're spending your money. And that's a good indicator of, the things that you prioritize. You have to be careful. You look at that, it could be a realization that, hey, I'm not really spending my money on things that I should be.
Okay. So one is the financial aspect of it, right? And where are you spending? And that's a pretty obvious one, right? Where are you spending your money? Examining yourself there. What else? Other observations on that? Yeah, so that's a really good point. So I heard time, and then I heard local engagement, local involvement, and I'll come to you in just one second, Jeff. As it relates to time, at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that where you spend your time, regardless of what you want to say about it, where you spend your time is ultimately a direct reflection of your priorities, right? Like, you can justify it all you want, and this applies to me as much as you, right? Like, so this is not me, judging any of you, because I judge myself on this all the time. At the end of the day, we all have the same amount of time. We may not all have the same amount of money. We may not all have the same amount of intelligence. We may not have the same amount of capabilities because God has blessed us all differently. But where you spend your time, if you really take account of that, then that ultimately tells you kind of where your priorities are, right? And over the years, There have been many occasions where I spent way too much time at work. You know, in my 20s, I worked like 80 hours a week, you know, pursuing a professional goal, right? And part of it also was I kind of had a plan of where I wanted to be, et cetera. Spent way too much of my time. Regardless of what I told you about, my priority was my family, my priority was, you know, church, whatever. It was not, because my time was all spent, you know, like pursuing my professional goals, okay? So now, I couldn't while I was in the middle of that, you know, necessarily say that, but looking back now, I can judge, you know, my actions and my behavior at the time and say, regardless of what I said to you, like, I was lying, because that's where my focus was, right? Like, and what I try to do now is I try to be much more aware of that, right? And I try to make choices that, you know, reflect things differently. Now, do I do it perfectly? I absolutely don't. But I'm very much aware that where I choose to spend my time is really what my priorities are, you know? And I can justify all I want, but that's, for me, that's a way that I kind of keep myself, you know, honest. Jeff?
Say throughout cultures, the definition of treasure shifts somewhat, right? There's different cultures that value different things. And that's really, I think, what this, you have to stop and define what is the Bible saying about treasure. Treasure is what you value.
Yep.
Right? And it's just simply saying, you know, your values are going to be revealed through your heart. So you can say that this thing is important to you, but if your actions, if your heart's not involved in it, it will be revealed. You know, you're going to show, hey, you might say that this is the important thing, but look what you're doing.
Yep, absolutely. And listen, once again, not trying to be legalistic here and say you have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, right? This is not about being legalistic and saying you're obligated to do X, Y, or Z. It's more just to get you to maybe think a little bit differently about, you know, your priorities, and more importantly, like, how do your choices reflect what you say versus what you do, right? Ken?
I think we have to be a little careful about when we're talking about like the priority thing. I see the example of Christ, and he was the same person no matter where he was physically. He was still God, and he led people by example. And I think sometimes, I think sometimes we get legalistic about, well, you're not going to enough church-driven activities, so you must not be as dedicated, or you must not be a strong Christian as the ones that are coming more often, like we're keeping attendance. And I think everybody needs to realize you need to be a Christian wherever you are at all times. And sometimes I just feel like when we get into the subject, we can be judgmental.
Yeah, and once again, hopefully I've communicated it clearly. My goal is not to judge here or to be legalistic, more just to get you thinking, right? Because I think one of our challenges is to that point, right? If everybody felt like I'm doing everything I can to be a good Christian for myself or to be a good Christian for the people closest to me, what happens to the church? If your choices don't reflect on things that help grow this church, right, or support this church. And I kind of go back, and I'll come over here, and I have two comments. We have to kind of balance the whole, I think one of the traps we can fall to is, and I know this for my own personal self, is we can say to ourselves, I'm doing enough for Christ, and I'm doing enough for me, but I would bring it back to, how does that help this church 20 years from now, right? I mean, like, how does that, because I feel like we have an obligation to the church as well, because if there is no church, right, and if you look around, the average age in here has got to be at least 45 to 55, right? Like, and even in the young adults class, there's not enough people in that young adults class to ultimately replace all of you. So, you know, in 30 years from now, like, you know, what's the church going to look like? So part of it is, you know, are we making the choices now to make sure the church is in a position so it is, like, if all of you, if all of us, I'll put me in the category, 30 years from now, I'll be 80, I'll be dead probably, but I'll be 80 years old, right? If I live for 30 years, I'll be, you know, I'll be really old. Um, most of you will be dead, but I'll be really old. No, just kidding. You know, like even if we just take the entire young adults class and we just pop them in here, like we need like the back 2 rows, right? Like so my comments are more around like, what are we doing to kind of grow the church, you know, develop that next generation of leaders and contribute to building the church. So 2 comments over here, and then I'll come to you, Frank. Yeah.
I was going to say, we are always, once we become a Christian, our goal is to always try to be a better, stronger Christian, to be more spiritual. But there also is reality that we go through different seasons in our life. And each season brings about its own challenges, and we have different abilities, how we maintain our spirituality. So it may be different. Like, my life has changed dramatically in the last couple of years, and so has Don's. And so we can't do the same thing.
Right.
So you find what can you do?
What else can you do?
What can you do?
Yep.
And, you know, and like people with young children, again, their kids get sick a lot, so they get hampered too. But it's not just showing up here. It's important that we need to show up here. But also, what are we doing at home?
100%. Yeah, and
How much time in prayer and scripture, and you can talk to somebody on the phone, send a note of encouragement or whatever. I mean, like I said, different seasons, you do something different.
And that's a wonderful point. It really is, because the reality of it is, if you think about it, and you said this, like you have a young family, it can be a lot harder, right, to do stuff, right? As you incur medical challenges later on, you know, things change in your life, it's going to be harder. We kind of all have these prime years where you can contribute. And what's really interesting, if you look at this eldership of this church over the last 25, 30 years, and Kim, I know you and I, you know, have talked a little bit about this, and Bill and I. If you look at the eldership, you know, like the elders kind of have these prime years to serve, and then they go live with the grandkids. They, you know, may experience medical issues. Same, like, so the question becomes like during those prime years, you know, kind of what are you contributing? Because at some point, you may not be able to contribute, right? So we all kind of have, just like everything in life, there's stages. And so at what stage are you giving the most you can give to God's church, right, to grow that church, knowing there's going to be bookends where you're not going to be able to, right? Marcy.
I was just going to say, building off the comment over here, is I feel blessed to be part of this church in that I really feel like in terms of like church functions and showing up to things that we have at church, I've never felt judged by not. I feel like those have been offered in terms of not you need to come to this to show you're a great Christian, or hey, these are opportunities we're offering to come and be part of the family, and because we love you and we want to help you grow.
Yep.
And I just feel blessed that I think that's the message this church has.
100%.
Whether it's the eldership or people putting the functions together, we're a family, and here we have this opportunity, and if you can make it, we'd love to have you here. And I think that's a blessing.
I think it's a huge blessing, absolutely. And I'm gonna let Frank make a comment, and I wanna kind of build on that. Go ahead.
So I think when you look at Jesus' interactions and teachings, he pretty makes it really clear that our faith is not about checking boxes.
Right.
In fact, he was talking to people who thought it was about checking boxes.
Yep.
He made it really, really clear. So, I think there's the other scripture about setting your minds on things. So it's about just what are we thinking about on a daily basis? What are our aspirations? In our faith, if we have the right relationship with God, the desire to worship will be there. The desire to pray will be there. The desire to trust and rely on God will all be there. So if we're trying to force those things, somehow we miss the boat.
Absolutely.
So it's,
Yep.
It's more organic out of your love for God.
Certainly should be. And I think people are, some people are motivated differently, right? Like some people are entirely motivated by love, right? Like, and they're going to do it just because they love. Some people need other forms of motivation because love isn't enough, right? Or your love may be, but that's a really good point. So I want to capitalize on something you said. So one of the interesting things, and I hear all the time how amazing Jeff is. You might know. He's sitting right next to you. We'll have a meeting, or we'll be talking to Asa, or even Jack last summer. I just hear repeatedly kind of how amazing Jeff is and how he always helps the youth. He always steps up and, does X, Y, and Z. He's led class after class, et cetera. And the interesting thing is, Jeff isn't in a leadership position formally, but he's contributing so significantly to this church and the youth of this church for kind of future generations, despite everything else he has going on, right? Oh, absolutely, right? So Jeff, why do you do that?
Honestly, because I love doing it.
Okay.
You know what? I've said very, very often, being in with the kids on a Wednesday night teaching, it's the highlight of my week.
Okay.
It's like.
So part of it's personal fulfillment.
Yes.
Right, that's part of it. What are the other reasons why you do it?
I was taught to serve.
Okay.
That was like, growing up, I was in lads to leaders. It was an example that my parents put forward. That's what you do. That's it's part of your worship to God is service. A lot of it is, I wouldn't say it's personal. I love the kids.
Okay. But I want to key in on, you were taught to serve. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I remember being in lads leaders when I was in fourth grade. I remember being in the kindergarten class and the teachers teaching us then okay, you need to help lead this class. Going out and doing Meals on Wheels with my parents, doing down at food banks, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if
When we were out with, where were we with kids? Was it kids from school or kids from church? And we were out somewhere, and he said, well, while we're here, we need to take this opportunity to serve. Where were we? Do you remember?
let me ask you one other question. So let's just say you stopped enjoying working with the kids, because you the kid, you just got a bad group of kids, and you're I'm done with these kids, right? Could you just stop doing it tomorrow?
No, because I heard this example and I always liked it, right? When you're younger, you can go and your mom can say, oh wow, you didn't drink at that party. That's great. You've made me really proud. Okay, but if you were 50 years old, right, and you're coming in and you're doing things for someone else, it's no longer a sense of pride. It's wait, why are you doing this for someone else? It gets to a point where you have to be doing things because that's who you are.
Ah, that's the point I was looking at. And the reason why I focused on you, and one, because you're a great example, and people do constantly talk about how great you are and how much you contribute. So thank you for that. But second of all, it's a choice you've made to serve, right? It's behind the scenes. It's outside of the things you do at VBS. It's not front and center, but you're always there for those kids, right? And what I heard you say, and we're going to transition to this, is it has now become not just kind of a sense of responsibility, but more of an obligation to serve the kids, right? Because it's transformed into what you feel like you need to do because you've done it for so long, and that's what it's transformed into. I've got a comment up here. Yep.
What he's saying about he loves doing it.
Yep.
Delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. You may not even know. I don't have children, but I love kids. And I would never have thought of me teaching or doing anything like that. But I gotta tell you, doing it is the desire of my heart, which I never knew was the desire of my heart.
There you go. You kind of stumbled on it, right? Yeah. And
God works.
And yeah, it is funny how God works, right? So that's kind of what I'm going back to. Like, you were taught to serve, right? And part of this is like, how do we teach ourselves to overcome? It's really easy to say, hey, my relationship's right with God. I read the Bible every day. I study every day. Like, I'm good. Like I'm totally cool. Like, God and I are great. We get along well. But that doesn't help anybody around you, right? Like, it doesn't help the church for you to be right with God, right? Like, and that's kind of the point. The service that you have. And we talked about this last week. And I spent a lot of time this week because we started discussing obligation versus responsibility. And I want to talk about this for a minute. I'm going to read something and we'll kind of discuss it. So obligation is something you should do because it's right. You don't necessarily choose to do it, or you chose something at the time and now have to follow up with action, right? So you made a choice, and as a result, you have to do something. And there's some good examples here. An example would be the obligation of a parent to care for a child or a doctor to care for a patient. So, like, you're not obligated to take care of your kids, right? Like, you can give them to social services if you want, right? Like you're responsible, like you could, right? Like, there's no obligation there. Like, call up DHS, hey, take these little rugrats. They're a handful, right? But because of your kids, you feel obligated to take care of them. Although really you're not responsible for taking care of them, okay? It's a choice. Now, nobody call DHS on your kids after this, or I'll be in trouble. Go ahead from the back there.
Listening to Jeff, he hit the nail right on the head. He said, my parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scripture says, bring up a child in the way that he should go and they'll never leave you. That's not a suggestion.
100%. I'll come over here. Let me continue on for a second. So, yeah, absolutely. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Responsibility is something you take on yourself. It is followed by obligation. For example, and this is a good work example, you take on the responsibility of managing employees. It is then followed by the obligation to make sure you are giving them the tools they need to succeed, finding out what's holding them back of their performance if it doesn't seem up to par, and holding them accountable when they slack off, right? So once again, like, not only are you responsible for those employees, but it turns into an obligation to make sure they're supported and to make sure they're doing everything. In many ways, they are the same thing, but the angle is slightly different. Responsibilities are more intrinsic as opposed to obligations. The latter, I think, is something you have towards your environment, society, surroundings, basically. So basically, when you move from that internal responsibility of I'm responsible for me, or I'm obligated to whatever it is I've committed to, there's a shift there, right? And I'll talk about that in just a second. Go ahead. Okay. Absolutely.
It's a huge jump.
100%. Well, and I go back to, I'll come to you in just 1 second, Brian. You know, one of the things I've taught my sons, rightly or wrongly, right? You don't have to agree to this, is I've taught them that they are blessed. They've been, given a lot of things in life, and therefore they are obligated to do certain things, right? Like, I don't say, hey, you're responsible for whatever, like, you're obligated. So at the end of the day, like, the Lord has blessed you with this. The Lord has given you this. The Lord has given you those things. You're obligated to give back to the Lord because he's given those things to you. Now, you can say that's pretty legalistic, but I know if I teach them it's an obligation and they just backslide a little bit to maybe between obligation and responsibility, they're going to do something, right? Now, you can argue bad tactic, good tactic, whatever, and we've always said to our kids, like, as long as we financially support you, you're going to church. Like, you don't have to like it, but you're going to church. Now, some people may disagree with that, but there was always an obligation associated with you get our financial support, you go to church. And so once again, it's landing somewhere between the legalistic aspect of you have to do X, Y, and Z, and building behaviors in a culture to like what Jeff said. Jeff is giving back today because he was taught to do X, Y, and Z. My point is, before I go to Brian, what are the things we're doing today to teach not just ourselves, but to teach our children to do X, Y, and Z to continue the church on, right? Because if everybody feels a responsibility, but nobody's obligated to do it, you get West Branch, you get Grayling, you get, all the other churches, right? Because at some point, not enough people felt obligated to do the things to lead those churches. The churches just go away, right? So that, once again, not being legalistic, but it's really easy for us, and I do it as much as you do, just to say, I don't need to do that, right? I'm not obligated to do that. We're trying to find a balance between feeling a really strong commitment / obligation to do something because what you've been given and what you've been blessed with versus just, I should probably do this because. Go ahead, Brian.
I'm just going to go back to the idea of seasons again, because I think that was a good comment. There are times, Jeff's not going to be able to do what he does for all time. Right?
Yep.
There's going to be a time when it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard, and there's going to be things that have to transition. And I think we have a lot of folks in our congregation that are not serving in a front and center kind of way, that are helping elderly folks get to the church, helping people get in and out of places, I would even say some of our folks that can't do a lot, that it's hard for them to get here, but they show up, they have a smile on their face, they greet our kids, they greet, there is so much acts of service that happen that are not kind of what we've been talking about too much, I think, today. You mentioned there's bookends where you can't do it anymore. I would say that no, there's never a time in all of your life where you can't perform some form of service, and sometimes your form of service is being a gracious receiver of service, to be the object that is being served for those that are younger or better equipped or whatever to fulfill those roles that God has laid out for them, and you being the gracious recipient of that service is an act of service, because you could be curmudgeonly about it and kind of really be a stick in the mud about the whole thing because you're not happy with where you're at. But being that example for folks, I think I could list a bunch of people that I'm always impressed. And there a lot of times, I saw it happen just today as people were walking in and that kind of stuff. One of those folks helping somebody get into the building even. And that, I think, we have to be aware that while it may not be helping the youth or it may not be, up there in the front, we have a lot of opportunities for folks to provide service in a way that is quiet.
Yeah, it's really, I'm glad that you said that, because we've had a couple of things happen, like with the ladies group, et cetera, where ladies have really stepped up and they've done things where they're never going to be up here, where they're never going to get a lot of recognition unless it's called out, but they've brought groups together, they're doing things. And once again, this discussion isn't about like doing something public for everybody, right? It's about examining like what you're doing. Doesn't have to be front and center, right? But we met, I'm not going to mention names, but we met with somebody, a few weeks ago that's just doing a phenomenal job with a group here in the church. Most of you don't even know it, right? And I would say in that particular case, like we need more of that, right? Like, because you can never have too much of that, right? And your geography may limit you in one way, your work schedule may limit you in another. My ask is like, challenge yourself, like what could you do that maybe you're not doing today that could help the church or help somebody in the church? Doesn't always have to be in a leadership capacity.
You made a very good point about being the recipient of service. I don't think that's done enough.
No, it can be a hard thing to do.
Personal opinion,
Yeah, it can be a hard thing to do, absolutely.
It's a hard thing to do.
I did hear somewhere in that, Brian, you said Jeff's kind of getting old. You're not sure if he's going to be able to help you. Like, that's what I heard. Like, my new hearing aids were working when you said that. Jeff, we're going to keep you for a few more years. Was there another comment over here? Yeah.
Crafts and stuff. I'm helping, but the thing is, like, Lydia needs ideas.
Yep.
If people have ideas that, to help her come up with ideas for us to, work with the kids and do things with the kids.
Yeah, so sometimes it's as simple as like, here are the things you could do. And interestingly enough, Sherry mentioned a while ago, and one of the things we want to do next year, and this goes back to a comment that was made earlier, like we need to do more locally, to bring more people into the church, right? Because we do a great job of supporting Thailand and, so we need to do more locally. And we need to do more youth stuff. And you said, hey, we've got all these ladies who have all this fabric and they're willing to share it for these purposes. Like, how do we get more of those things out? Because your service may not be you show up and you build a craft with them. Your service might be, here are all the things that you need that I've had that can ultimately make it a better experience for the kid. And more importantly, it means less stress for those who are organizing it. So you don't have to lead it, but you can help behind the scenes to make sure whoever's leading it, whether it be Brian or anybody else, like Asa, like they have all the tools and resources they need, right? And it doesn't have to always be financial, right? There was another comment over here. I'll go Shannon, and then I'll work my way up front.
I think to whom much is given, much is expected, and we don't always have to want to do something to do it. And I think that's been a challenge for me. I mean, sometimes we do the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Yep. Like we have this discussion about certain activities you do here, right? And I remind you frequently that those are...
Teaching is not my favorite. Or like
It's not.
It's not a strong suit for me, but I feel compelled to do it because I think it's the right thing to do.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And listen, the hard choices are when you make yourself do something that you don't necessarily want to do in the beginning. And to Sherry's point, sometimes that can turn into a huge blessing. This class has been that for me. I didn't want to do it, when I started, but I had to do it because someone needed to do it, right? And it's turned into a really big blessing for me. And some weeks it's still hard with scheduling, et cetera. But you do it because like the Lord has given you the ability to do it, and I could make the choice to say I can't do it, but I do it because like I feel obligated to do it, but I do it with the right spirit and the right heart, right? But that sense of obligation is the difference between me saying no, somebody else can do it, and me doing it myself. There was.
Kind of thinking about is how, like in the Bible, it's kind of modeled for us that we're going from like legalistic state to more of a heart-filled state.
Yeah.
Where in the Old Testament you tithe 10% no matter what. In
100%.
the New Testament you give from your heart, you give what you can. And I did see something that I was looking to do next week. Oakland County Mutual Aid is doing a drop-off of new and gently used like coats, scarves, gloves, and food at the Waterford Library next Sunday between 10 and 12. So I have some in my car and I'm going to drop off next week after class. So if anyone's interested, that's available.
There you go. It's great. I'll end with this, and I know class is about over. I have a 10-page lesson on the parable of the talents, right? Interestingly enough, it's like 16 verses, but you can get 10 pages out of it. And why do I have that lesson? I have that lesson, we've not talked about it, because it keeps me grounded as it relates to how I'm serving, right? Like I go through, and I've had this for a while, I've marked it up in some cases. I've had this because it keeps me grounded, right? And I've kind of thought about the right time to discuss it, but once again, I'm trying to balance like the things that are on my heart versus the things that benefit all of us. But when I think about that particular set of passages, it grounds me to remember, that while you can't earn your way to heaven, right? You can't. You certainly have some sort of obligation, to the Lord, right? It's really interesting because the next verse here, one of my favorite verses is, in this whole lesson, I should say, was 2 Corinthians 5:10. For we all must appear before judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due to us. And it's this part, for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad, right? So there's an element in there of, that part of, may receive what is due to us for the things done while in the body, right? So there's a certain level of contribution that's expected. While it may not earn you salvation, right? There's still something to be done, right? And so, once again, not trying to be legalistic, but one of the things that's on my heart is like, how do we grow the church, and how do we make the choices that mean the church, make sure the church is alive and thriving, 20 years from now, all right? Thank you very much.